From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. You know you're in a bad way when you can barely convince your own party that things are going well. That was the case when Reparation H, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, came to address the general session of the DNC this weekend and said this. Listen to the reaction.
I know, and I believe we know, when we show what we have accomplished just in a year.
Oh my God.
And when we show it is because the American people voted. I believe we will meet the moment again. But that is our task. Our task is to show people that in many ways they got what they ordered. Right? They said this is what they wanted.
The sound of two hands clapping.
Wow, that's pretty bad, Dan.
They got what they ordered. They ordered high inflation. Well, no, I know. It's not Joe Biden's fault. He said so.
Right.
As we provide this support to Ukraine, we're going to continue to stand together with our allies in Europe and send unmistakable message that we will defend every inch of NATO territory, every single inch, with a united, galvanized NATO. One movement. That's why I moved over 12,000 American forces along the borders with Russia, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Romania, etc. Because they move once. Granted, if we respond, it is World War III, but we have a sacred obligation on NATO territory, a sacred obligation, Article 5. And we will not, although we will not fight the Third World War in Ukraine.
No, that was a different clip, but he was complaining about Americans blaming him for inflation when, of course, it's a Putin price hike. Nancy Pelosi also borrowing a page from Joe Biden in Joe Obama's first term, you recall, with the bailouts following the 2008 recession. Joe Biden famously said we need to keep spending to prevent from going bankrupt. Nancy Pelosi said we need to keep spending to keep inflation down.
So when we're having this discussion, it's important to dispel some of those who say, well, it's the government spending. No, it isn't. The government spending is doing the exact reverse, reducing the national debt. It is not inflationary, A. B, we don't want to reduce the increase in jobs, which we're very proud of, this president breaking records.
Yeah, so $12, $13 trillion of funny money is non-inflationary. It's reducing the debt, you see. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend John Tamny. He is a editor at RealClearMarket's.com, director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks, author of When Politicians Panicked, of course, about COVID. John, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So government spending is non-inflationary.
Well, it's not. I mean, I hate to say it, it's not. Devaluation of the currency is what is inflation. There's this view that government spending doubles up on demand in the economy. No, governments can only spend what they've taken from us first. And so even demand can't drive prices up. Destruction of the currency can, and we've seen that. It happened most notably under George W. Bush in the 2000s, but it's happening again now. If you look at gold, which is just an objective measure of the dollar's value, it's over $2,000. And so we're seeing a devaluation of the dollar under Biden. That's the inflation. And I think everyone needs to get their story straight.
And the printing press, that has nothing to do with driving inflation?
Well, I reject
and devaluing the currency and thus driving inflation? Money supply? Doesn't matter?
I think people vastly overstate that. What's the fifth most supplied currency in the world? It's the Swiss franc. They've got a population of, 8 million? Are they devaluing their currency? Their supply is enormous. No, because it's much demanded around the world.
Well, right. Don't we have too many dollars chasing too few goods at this point?
No, I don't think so. In Mexico, do you think there's lots of pesos going around? You think in North Korea there's lots of yuan going around? The currency of choice in North Korea is the dollar. We can get into the weeds on this, but the simple truth is devaluation is a policy choice. It happened under Jimmy Carter. It did not happen under Ronald Reagan. It did not happen under Bill Clinton. It's no surprise that Reagan and Clinton oversaw booming economies and stock markets. It happened substantially under George W. Bush. Do you think that oil just sextupled under Bush just by coincidence? Or do you think that that was his policy to devalue the dollar? Do you think that the dollar fell against the euro, yen, yuan, every major currency during Bush? Was that not inflation? My point here is I don't want to get an argument, but I see consistency in this. I just wish for once a right who's suddenly all over Biden, and Biden's a complete clown. Find me the pieces by me that defend him. But a much more substantial devaluation of the dollar occurred under Bush, and I don't remember most conservatives talking about the inflation then.
Well, I mean, you did have conservatives talking about government spending and Fed policy. I mean, government spending in terms of creating new entitlements like Medicare Part D. I remember talking about that and being opposed to it. And the profligate spending under W, the profligate spending under most presidencies, with few exceptions over the last, 125 years. But I mean, the idea that that Fed policy, asset purchases, and printing money, everybody gets a payoff, is not connected to devaluing the currency and driving inflation. I'm having a hard time understanding.
Well, that's fine, but that's not what's happening. The Fed is borrowing money from banks. That's where it's getting the money to make these asset purchases. And if you think that I support this stuff, feel free to look through books I've written about the Fed and look through op-eds. If you can find someone who's been more critical of the Fed over the years than me, I want to meet this person. But that's not the cause of a devalued dollar. The devalued dollar is policy, and it's a policy choice. Look, we had deficits under Ronald Reagan, yet the dollar was rising in value. To pretend that that's what the cause is just a mistake cause and effect. Reagan was for a strong dollar. Bill Clinton was for a strong dollar.
So be specific then about the policy cause of the of inflation that's trending towards double digits.
Well, the policy cause, I think, is fairly obvious. 2 years ago, they shut down major parts of the global economy.
And right,
you think that you can just turn that back on and expect the global? I know you're familiar with iPencil. Even something as basic as the pencil is the result of remarkable global cooperation. So you destroy supply chains developed by billions of workers engaged in trillions of different transactions over decades, and then expect that miracle, the miracle that resulted in remarkably low prices, to come back online, is fanciful on a level that's hard to put a number, or it's just staggering.
Well, I agree. I agree with that.
I know, but it staggers me that conservatives would say, well, this is inflation. No, command and control was imposed on the economy, and dare I say it, who was in office at the time? And I
agree.
I beg you to find someone. You've been having me on for years. I am not a Democrat, listeners. I am the biggest critic of government I think you'll find out there. And so we had global lockdowns. Is it any surprise that prices are higher today? Now,
well,
the myriad demerits of Biden, I'll give them to you.
But I mean,
this is not inflation.
Well, okay, well.
This is command and control that results in higher prices. You shut down an economy, you're going to limit the ability of people to produce at levels that are very low in terms of prices.
Oh, I mean, I agree with that. I agree with that. This all begins with shutting down a $20 trillion economy and the hubris of thinking you flip a switch and then everything goes back to where it was previously like magic. I completely agree with that. But then you also have to address flooding the zone with $10 to $12 trillion of funny money so that the economy was the government printing money and distributing it.
Well, but again, I think you overstate the printing money aspect of it. But yes, government did, after destroying an economy or parts of it, under Republicans, President Trump signed a $2.9 trillion spending bill, which was the ultimate non sequitur. Okay, we've wrecked you, so we're going to throw money at you, when the only answer was to stop wrecking you in the first place. And so more of my frustration with this is, hey, you want to talk about the oil price? Let's talk about the oil price. Yeah, why was it $10 a barrel under Reagan and Clinton? Well, guess what? They had good dollar policy. And dollar policy comes from Treasury. There's this myth that the Fed controls the value of the dollar. It does not. It never has. I can cite chapter and verse to you going back through history to show you the devaluations. They were the consequence of Treasury and the president, not what the Fed did. But if we want to talk about the oil price, yeah, when Bush got into office, it was $25 a barrel. At one point during his presidency, it was $150. The inflation that we're talking about, the devaluation of the dollar, has been a 21st century thing. It's not something that some nobody, inconsequential person like Biden cooked up within a year in the White House.
No, but
now,
it
there's
is
so much to criticize Biden about, but let's be real about where these high prices came from.
So what is your response to the modern monetary theorists that span administrations that believe in that there is no downside to the Fed printing money?
Well, I think it's absurd, but the Fed is just an arm of government. You think that quote, money printing wouldn't occur without the Fed? That's just the Fed is just an outsourced version of what Congress would be doing anyway. And so we can talk about printing money. I think you once again overstate the cause and again what's happened. Yeah, but modern monetary theory is as old as mankind, and it is ridiculous as it gets. The idea that you can print wealth defies basic common sense. Wealth is created. It cannot be printed. And so, of course, it's ridiculous. My only dispute here is I think we have to look at why prices are much higher today. And I think a lot of this is rooted in what happened long before Biden got into office. You can't shut down a global economy and expect prices to remain low.
Well, understood. Although, of course, we know that this administration, from top to bottom, is full of cheerleaders for the shutdown of the economy too. So whether it predated him and also includes him or not, this is the policy choice they advocated for. Let's talk specifically about energy. I want to get your reaction to this response from Jackie Daly, who's an attorney in the energy sector, and she's at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. She was also a staff attorney for a couple congressional committees. This is in response to the energy pronouncements from Mayor Pete and Kamala last week, where they're imagining, electric buses and trains and so forth. Listen to Jackie Daly.
We need to use what we have right now in place already for the immediate crisis. Does he understand there's a war going on that could quickly explode into something much bigger? Does he understand
in more ways than one.
We don't have time for this. Second, he clearly doesn't understand that electric vehicles are made from oil. Every piece of them are made from oil. The fiberglass, the paint, the battery, everything is made from oil. Moreover, the battery components themselves are made of rare earth elements, the supply chain of which is controlled by China. He's giving more supply chain control to China, and the Germans are doing the same. Right now, they're doubling down in the middle of this war. Like, this is a great time to build more solar and more electric vehicles. No, because they're like, we control our solar. Russia controls the natural gas. They have the gas. We control the solar. No, you don't. China controls the solar and the electric vehicles. And by the way, Germany's sitting on top of a sea of natural gas that they refuse to frack because the Green Movement succeeded in getting them to commit suicide and become totally dependent on the Russians.
And that's what's happening here, too.
Yeah, which is disgusting.
John?
she's not as confused as Buttigieg and all of them are. But look, I'll take you back to it's an interview with George W. Bush. He said, when I first met Putin, he was desperate. Well, guess what? Yeah, with oil at $25 a barrel, Putin was desperate, and his country needed help. Who bailed him out? The United States. We devalued the dollar, and oil went up over 6 times during Bush's presidency. I can come on here and tell you what you want to hear, that we've got to drill, baby, drill, but there's simply no basis for that. Under Reagan and Clinton, Reagan is heroic as it gets, and he's my favorite president. Guess what? There's no drilling in the United States. Why? Not because of the greens, but because at $10, $20 a barrel, the economics of extracting oil in the United States made no sense. So the industry largely didn't exist. Now, in that realm, and under Clinton too, with a strong dollar, the Russians weren't a threat to do anything because oil was inexpensive. And so we can talk about drilling, but the reality is, and Harold Hamm will tell you this, read my books and you'll see the quotes from him, it doesn't make sense to extract oil, to frack it at prices below $60 or $50 a barrel. There's a reason the frackers are dormant right now. No one will finance their activity. And why will they not? Because oil has to be very expensive for fracking to make economic sense. So we can talk about drill, baby, drill, and all this jingoistic stuff that pleases everyone, says, oh, aren't we great, and aren't the Greens stupid? Well, of course the Greens are complete idiots. But if you actually want to do something about the price of a barrel of oil, we've got to change dollar policy. It's been horrendous under Republicans and Democrats for the last 20 years. And so, sorry, that's what I will tell you.
So when Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy says that we could supply 160,000 barrels of oil per day if you green-lighted the Willow Project in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, you say you're missing the point. That's not a supply issue?
Well, you think 160,000 barrels would be a drop in the bucket? You think that would change what is a global price? There's this myth out there that there's a U.S. price for oil and a France price. No, it's a global price. It would be utterly meaningless. Let's have it. I am for freedom to drill wherever it makes economic sense. But I'm just making the point that how funny it is that when the U.S. was not even a player in oil, oil was cheapest. Well, there's a reason for that. Under Reagan and Clinton, dollar policy was very sound. Remember the constant refrain from Clinton's Treasury Secretary, strong dollars in the best interest of the American people. Remember, Ronald Reagan ran for president on the notion of stabilizing and strengthening the dollar. Back then, oil was cheap. You were paying under $1 for gasoline, and guess what? The economics of extracting oil stateside made 0 sense. Why are we suddenly doing what the most backward nations like Equatorial Guinea, Iran, and other countries around the world can do, extracting oil? Well, we are because every American has suffered a dollar that has been severely shrunken. Look back to what oil cost. Look back what it cost to go to the pump in the 80s and 90s and remind yourself how much your money has been eviscerated. And I say this because, look, there's so much to criticize Biden about, including Biden on dollar policy. But I see red when our side acts like this is something new. This began with George W. Bush, and it began massively under George W. Bush. And it's time that we be honest with ourselves, because we can only have good arguments about our policies if we understand why our side has so consistently been so wrong about them.
Well, I mean, I look back just at gas prices under Trump in his last year as compared to where gas prices are now. And so, I mean, this dollar devaluation has been going on for some time, as you just articulated. And so explain the delta.
Well, yeah, the dollar is weaker since Biden got into office. There's no denying that. To me, I know it's low rent to bring up the gold price, but historically our side has. You know, when Biden got into office, what was gold? The dollar about what, 1/1600th of an ounce of gold. Now it's 1/2000th. That is a severe devaluation of the dollar. It also fell under Trump, and so gasoline is certainly more expensive now than it was under Trump. But let's be clear, relative to what it was under Clinton and Reagan, it was wildly expensive under Trump, and it was wildly expensive under Bush. And so my point again is that I'm not denying the devaluation under Biden. I just think the bigger story was the lockdowns in terms of prices. In terms of gasoline, this is a 21st century story. And until we come to terms with that, we're going to keep talking about drill, baby, drill, and all this stuff that's really popular on cable news, but that makes no economic sense. We are supposed to be the responsible ones. The challenge right now for oil companies is not just regulation and Biden's alleged war on energy. Hey, Bush was an oil man. Why did oil go so much under him? The challenge now is that there's no financing out there to extract oil that you may lose money on once you bring it to market. And it's very expensive to extract oil in the U.S. relative to anywhere else. And that's why historically when oil is cheap, that the U.S. is a non-player in the extraction industry.
He is John Tamny, editor of RealClearMarket's.com, director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks, author of When Politicians Panic, that is, When Politicians Panicked is the book on COVID. John, thanks as always. Appreciate it.